and welcome to today's session. So we wanted to talk to you about our plans for 129 Hamilton Road. So I'd like to start just by introducing those that are going to be presenting on the call today or answering questions. So my name's Ben Thomas. I work in the London Borough of Barnet at the council. Matt, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Good evening, everyone. My name is Matt Raleigh. I work at LEA. I won't explain the acronym, but it's for the Association of London Directors of Children's Services. So all the directors of children's services across London, and they're one of the sponsors of this project. So my role is in helping to develop this project.
Hi, my name is Samaya and I'm project managing, helping and assisting my colleagues.
Great, thank you. So there are, I think we've just got 3 guests. So we've got some slides to go through to introduce the project, and then the things that we want to talk to you about. And then there'll be a period of time at the end to answer questions. But I just wanted to check with you all whether you're happy to, we'll just go through the slides as we're intending to. You know, we were thinking there might be more people, but with just 3 of you, are there any particular things that you wanted to cover? Or you have sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that we should see the slides.
Okay.
And then see, if we're going to go through the slides, let's go through the slides, and then if there are any questions, we can do that afterwards.
That's really helpful. Okay, thanks. Okay, so I'm just going to start with a very brief introduction to the project. It's called the London Accommodation Pathfinder. It's backed and funded by the Ministry of Justice and the Youth Justice Board. And it's an ambitious project working across London to provide an alternative option for children that are in the youth justice system. So these are children that are on the threshold where the courts would consider both community and custody options. And the aim of this project is to provide better support for this group of children within a community setting, and so improve their outcomes in terms of education, health, and life skills, with the intention that they will go on to much more positive outcomes in the future and have more positive lives. So the project will provide appropriate accommodation and a whole range of different interventions and different support with the aim of reducing reoffending. And although this is a new project, it's based on a lot of evidence that a community option reduces reoffending and does lead to better outcomes in the long term. So in terms of the purpose of today, we wanted just to introduce the partnership risk assessment and risk management plan that have been undertaken. And we wanted to get any feedback on those documents and welcome any comments on how they can be improved. And also we've received quite a few questions and comments during the consultation about how children taking part in this will actually spend their time. So we've got some draft timetables as examples of that we'd like to share. So before we start, just to make you aware that this is being recorded and it will be put on the council website, and we will keep the initial presentation short, but we will try and get through that and then answer questions at the end. So if you could stay on mute while the presentation is going on, and then as usual on Teams, raise your hand and I'll bring you in if you've got a question. But actually, I think with so few, I think it's fine if you want to raise your hand as we go through the presentation, and then we can take questions as we go rather than waiting the whole lot at the end. So Matt, can I hand over to you, please?
Yes, sure. And good evening again, everyone. Can I just check that people can see the slides on the screen? Someone give me a nod.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So prior to 129 Hamilton Road being set, or when that was first mooted as a property for the Pathfinder, a partnership risk assessment was undertaken around the location. The house was structurally and in terms of its layout, suitable for the delivery of the Pathfinder, but we wanted to check its potential impact within the local environment, and also whether placing vulnerable children into that environment would be safe for those children. So over recent months, we've had engagement with a number of community safety partners in Barnet, including the Metropolitan Police, their Safer Neighbourhoods team department, and the community safety team. We've undertaken a multi-agency location risk assessment around that property with those partners. What that's told us is that there aren't specific concerns around levels of crime, levels of exploitation of children, or anything of that ilk that would lead us to think that that the location was unsuitable, or that the Pathfinder couldn't be safely managed there. Could we move on to the next slide, please? Okay, so moving on to the running of the project itself. We've been asked on a number of occasions what sort of criteria and decisions we'd use for placing children there. This is showing quite small on my screen, so I won't run through every step in turn. But we wanted to show it to you, to show the process which is undertaken in terms of selecting children as suitable for this project, and to come and live in the Pathfinder. Crucial to that is the extent of information and the robustness of risk assessment with which those children are selected. So again, it's a multi-agency process involving youth offending teams. All the information that is held on around those children on local authority systems, so that's children's social care systems, information about their education, information about their health. Information is gathered from the courts and the police about current offending and any past or prior offending. And then that's compiled within a multi-agency risk assessment that looks really at two things: the needs of that particular child, whether they're well suited, whether the LAP would benefit them, whether they're motivated to go and make the most of that opportunity, and also whether that child can be safely managed within that property. Are their risks and needs manageable with the specialist accommodation provider support that will be in place, and by the wider partners that will be working around that. Subject to all of those criterion being met, the youth offending team would put the proposition to the court, and ultimately that decision would rest with the court as to whether that child's given that opportunity, and that would be either as part of a court sentence or as part of a court bail package. If we could move on, please. Okay, so we've flagged some of the risks that could potentially be associated with the Pathfinder, and this is with a view to getting ahead of them and mitigating and managing them. This isn't all of them, but these are the risks that we think of particular relevance to the local community. So I won't repeat the first one because we've covered that really, but a crucial part of the management of this property is the careful selection of the children who come here in the first place. In terms of the management of physical or verbally abusive behaviours, there's a really clear set of behavioural expectations that will be set and explained in advance to children, along with a set of consequences and sanctions should they not be complied with. As you might imagine, those consequences and sanctions are proportionate, and depending on what behaviour is being exhibited would range from warnings through to the potential immediate termination of a placement if something of concern happens. I think that's, yeah, along with the loss of placement, I should add that a child could be breached and returns to court. So there is still the sort of option of court sanctions as well as the loss of the place in the Pathfinder. If we could move on to the next slide, please. Similarly, we've thought carefully about the potential impact of any sort of antisocial behaviour or other behaviours of concern that could potentially emerge for the local community. Again, children will have those behavioural expectations set and explained in advance with the consequences and sanctions clearly outlined. And I would emphasise that those consequences and sanctions will be proportionately applied, but swiftly applied. And if there is any suggestion that those risks can't be safely managed, places will be terminated. Children coming to the Pathfinder will have a workshop about the local community that will be specific to the local community in Barnet. Coming from outside of Barnet, I won't know that dynamic as well as someone like Ben will. But we will want to educate the children coming about the community in which they're going to live for a period of time. We're going to ask that children invest in the community through projects that will be facilitated by Barnet Council, such as community reparation. There are some additional what we call control measures that come with the children's placements, courtesy really of the court, such as electronic curfews, GPS tracking, and if we do have concerns, there's a potential for sort of additional staff supervision outside of the property as well as within it. And we'd really emphasise the wish to work collaboratively with not only all the local community safety partners, probably highlight the police in particular, and the local community safety team, but also with any residents forums that exist as well. Yeah, so I think that's it for that slide. If we could move on, please. A quick note on visitors or potential acquaintances or friends coming to the property. It can't happen without prior arrangement and consent of the accommodation provider. All entrance and exits to the property are controlled by staff, and there is the use of CCTV at the front and rear of the property. There is a serious incident protocol in place if on the unlikely, but we still have to plan for it, potential that a serious incident could take place. In fact, each agency tends to have its own serious incident protocol regarding that, but the immediate priority will be the safety and well-being of all involved, including members of the community. If we could move on, please. Yeah, I'll just pick out a couple of these which I think are the most pertinent ones, but additional measures for the management of the property are: it will be staffed by 2 staff for 24 hours a day, every day of the year, including waking night staff. As I've mentioned, we think our relationships with local partners, the Safer Neighbourhoods team and the local community will be critical to managing the Pathfinder as a partnership rather than just a provision that stands by itself. There are physical restrictions to areas within the property, such as the roof and the garden, which we think will minimise any potential risks, and some restrictions in terms of access. So, for example, children won't be allowed into the garden after 10 o'clock at night. The last one, which I think I would emphasise again, is the use of a whole system of services to support the child. So they are intensively supported by the specialist staff who live within the provision who support them within the provision. But that's not all that these children receive. They also receive support from youth offending workers, from social workers, from health workers, from education, training and employment workers. And you'll see some of that in their timetables momentarily. If we could move on, please. Yeah, so we've drafted 2 potential timetables for children, one for a child who's not in education, training and employment, and one for a child who's in college, to give you a sense of the intensity with which they will be occupied and supported. So it covers a range of activities, but they will essentially be occupied for the majority of each day. That will include things like life skill sessions, education, training and employment sessions, career sessions, health support, mental health support, and anything else that's required to be tailored specifically to that child's needs. If we could move on, please. And again, a similar timetable for a child who's in college. I won't run through that in detail. That's it. I'll hand back to Ben, but that's the end of our presentation.
Thanks, Matt. So yeah, that's all the slides that we wanted to go through. So really just open it up to all those on the call. If you've got any questions, any comments, any feedback. Okay, thanks. Yes, Mr. Myatt.
So, yeah, I have a question. You said that while selecting this road, you sort of had this locations policy, which was a multi-agency approach. I don't know, because I wouldn't necessarily agree with some of the contentions in that slide that this was a area relatively free of crime and gang violence, because right in front of my house there was an incident where a gang member visited from South London and there was a fight that ensued, and one of them was almost about to stab the other one sitting on his stomach, when my neighbor called the police and the police siren, they left. The other incidents more recently was a person was stabbed near the corner shop. There's 2 doors down from me was multi-occupancy household. Now, I understand the council can regulate these kinds of households through the licensing system, but it doesn't do it very well, because this whole area, majority of them is either backseats or HMOs. So as a direct consequence of that, you have issues like 2 doors from me, they were growing cannabis. The police raided. After which the police had to attend a couple of times. There was this one person who came completely naked in front of my garden. Now, probably wasn't even aware he was naked, and my cameras caught him. My neighbor's camera caught him, and that's how, there's already too much problems on this street. Now, not so much for us as for these vulnerable children you're planning to relocate, because they will find people who can sort of groom them into more serious and organized crime. So I don't know if you say that this area was suitable on the basis you said it was. It would have been better if you had it in, say, Armitage Road or Basingstoke Road. Why did you consider those areas? Is it because they're much more, richer properties there, and then you can get away with what you're doing here? Because this is already an HMO, and I've been in contact with the MP for the area, asking him to influence the council to regulate the number of HMOs on this road, which is a direct cause of all the problems. And on top of that, you're piggybacking this sort of experimental regime on this road, which is, to be very frank, unfair. I mean, I don't know if you have any answers to that, but I clearly don't agree with the locations policy that you specified being a multi-agency approach, and the information you got from them is clearly wrong, because I live on the street. I know some of the instances I've mentioned, they existed, they happen on the street, and you might want to ask the police how many times they had to attend this road, and you'll get the answer there. So I'll yield to another 2 people who've raised their hands as well. Thank you for listening to me.
Okay, thank you. I might bring in Matt in a moment, but I'll just start by saying, I suppose, the data that we've got on this and the risk assessment that was done, showed that it was an area that had low crime rates, low drugs offences, and wasn't flagged by the police as an area that gangs operate. I think that's not to say that there aren't any issues there. I think most streets in London would have some level of crime on them. So I think it's saying that it's an area with low levels of relevant offences, but it's not to say there aren't any. And in terms of the actual property and specific location, we were also constrained by what was on the market. So, we had a set of criteria about the size of the house that was needed. It needed to be sort of 6 to 7 bedrooms. And there were, other criteria. And so we were limited by what was on the market as well. So we had to look at a whole different, there were a range of properties that came up that were looked at, but all of them were seen to be not suitable for various reasons, which was why this property was purchased. Matt, is there anything you'd like to add in response?
No, I think that pretty much covers it, Ben. I mean, the one thing I'd say is thank you for flagging as well that that we also need to look at the potential risks from location towards the children. I think you're right to flag that these are potentially children who could be vulnerable to exploitation. But just to echo Ben's comments, that when we did those checks, which were with a range of partners, it was with police and community safety, asking them for their best intelligence, they told us that that they felt in terms of sort of gang operations, this was a relatively low risk area. But I would thank you for raising that as a factor, because it is one that we considered. And the only other point that I'd make is that this property was an HMO previously, and we are looking to repurpose it and change that planning usage to a facility which is staffed by a highly skilled specialist provider, and we think therefore will be much better managed potentially than what came beforehand.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm not sure who was next, but I'll go with Mir if that's okay.
Hi, yeah, good evening. I've got a couple of points really. Now, one, a lot of talk about how this will benefit the children, and no doubt it will benefit the children. And there's always going to be an element of not in my backyard whenever you have a scheme like this, and whenever you sort of float this sort of idea. I would challenge the wisdom of saying we have an area with low crime, so let's introduce criminals and see what happens, which that might be simplistic, but essentially is what's happening. It's saying we've got low crime, so let's have a house with criminals and let's hope that they don't increase the crime in the area, which I have to question the wisdom of. That's my first point. My second point is, let me tell you why I joined this call. I'm not the sort of person to do this, and I would not normally do this, but on Friday afternoon, my two girls, I've got two girls, one is 9 and one is 7, who we live close, and we sent them to the shops, which are just next door, 129, to do some shopping. They went to the shops, they were on their way home and were chased by a man up Hamilton Road. They noticed that he was following them, so they walked faster, so he walked faster, so they ran, so he ran. And my 7-year-old has a friend who lives at the bottom of Woodstock Avenue, knocked onto their house, get away from this man. Now, do I feel safe having my children out? I want my children to be able to go out. I don't know if anybody else here has children, but I'm sure we all feel the same as parents. We don't want to, coop our children up in a house. We want them to grow up. We want them to develop as people, and especially, they're two girls. I want them to become strong, independent women, and that's how I think is a good way of doing it. Now, what now this happened literally this Friday. I didn't report this to the police. It won't be on any metrics anywhere or anything like that. But you know, then I see that this is about to happen, and we're about to introduce convicted criminals into the area. Who I accept there will be people there who will be managing them. I don't know if this is going to be outsourced, and we know how well the prison system works in its current form.
Thank you.
I can see it's been filled up, but the main one is opportunity. So I don't know what that.
Mira, I'm afraid you're breaking up there. I'll give you a moment just to see if you come back in.
Hello?
Hi there. Yeah, we can hear you again.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you again now.
I also want to understand there was a very I understand there was a very high level approach to the risk assessment. So you spoke to the police and neighbourhood watch, etc. I am a resident and I have friends who live in the area, and I think the other people on this call are also residents. I wonder what sort of engagement there was prior to clearly a decision being made, even before there was any sort of representation or sort of engagement, where with the people who live locally, who actually know what goes on day by day. I've just heard a couple of stories that I didn't know about, and I've just told you a story that I imagine nobody else knew about what actually goes on day by day. What on the ground consultations were made residents? Because to my knowledge there was none. And if you look through the responses online to the planning application, any positives, maybe there were a couple, but the vast majority were negatives. Now, I qualify that with lots of people saying not in my backyard. I just wonder, these my fears are A, how good is the supervision going to be? B, how much consultation was done with the people themselves, with the people who live locally themselves, and C, the wisdom of introducing criminals to a low crime area.
Okay, thank you very much for those points.
What Mir said, because at the time you were purchasing or you made the decision to purchase it, your solicitor or somebody should have written to the neighborhood asking for opinions, comments, whatever it is. When after having purchased it and spent a fortune doing what you're doing there, then to consult it now it looks more like a box ticking exercise than any meaningful consultation. If you were serious about consulting the neighborhood, you should have done it before you purchased it. So I'll back Mir 100% on that.
Frida, I'm afraid I'm struggling to hear that.
No, it wasn't me. It wasn't me.
Oh, sorry. Was that Mir again?
No, it wasn't me. It was the gentleman who spoke before.
Ah, okay. So I struggled to hear that, but I think we've got the questions there. So I was going to bring Matt in for 1 and 2, but just to respond to the third point about what engagement there was before purchasing the property. So the risk assessment, the kind of high level risk assessment that I mentioned, was undertaken before the property was purchased, because that could be done very quickly and we could gather up enough information. But in terms of engaging with residents, a property has to be bought fairly quickly. As I'm sure most of you will be aware, it's you can't spend months before making a decision on buying it, and so there just wasn't the time to do a full engagement. But we ran 2 events before even a pre-application was put in for planning, and then that's the purpose of these events as well. So we have engaged with the local residents, and we've written to 400 inviting them to these events for both the initial sessions and for these ones as well. So Matt, can I bring you in response to the first 2 questions?
Yeah, sure. I'll do my best. So I think without getting into a sort of very long discussion about children who commit crime. Yes, it is true that some of the children who will come to the property will have convictions. Some may not, actually, those who are on bail. However, what I would say is that coming from a sort of youth offending service background, our understanding of children who commit offences and the best way of supporting them and preventing them from committing further offences has significantly changed over time. There is a major difference between children who commit crime and adults who commit crime around their choices, their vulnerabilities, and the situations in which they've experienced and have been placed in, which lead to that occurring. So current evidence suggests that we are much better at seeing children as vulnerable children and addressing the circumstances which have led them to commit crime and adopting models that build on their strengths, that integrate them with communities, that develop their education, training, and employment, and address their health needs, rather than the more traditional sort of punitive criminal justice system of incarceration and punishment. So I would say, yes, you are right to say that some of these children will come with convictions, but I would also say that they in many cases will remain vulnerable children who've been carefully assessed in terms of the behaviours that they display and as to whether they can be safely managed or not, and that this provision is designed to give them support that will be more effective than the alternative at rebuilding their lives and reducing further offending. Yeah, I think I'm not sure what else there was to pick up out of the question, but
I think that covers it.
I think the issue you were referred to on the basis why didn't you consult the neighborhood prior and rather than after having made your decision and bought the property, etc. But I think part of that answer was covered by your colleague's reply. Thanks for that.
Thanks. Can I bring in Frida, please?
Yeah, thank you. I have several questions, and so rather than say them just all at once, I'd like to ask each one separately and then give whoever a chance to respond to the questions I have.
Yes.
First of all, thank you for this presentation. I am actually a resident as well, as two other people I believe have mentioned they are. With regards to surveys or questions or engaging the local residents, I was not informed of this. The only letter I ever received was when the planning permission was put in. And so that goes again to a point that has already been made as how can we trust the fidelity or the fairness of this application if the property's already been purchased?
If I could just jump in, I'm in exactly the same boat. The first I knew about this was that the planning, when I got a letter from planning, and I live literally within a 3-minute walk of this property, so I'm well within the catchment area, I'd imagine.
Exactly. Yeah. No, from all my neighbours, I'm on the next street from Hamilton Road.
Okay.
I've talked to people on Hamilton Road. I've even talked to the shops that are located there. No one knew.
Can I just bring in Samaya, actually, because I know that Samaya was responsible for letters being delivered, and so I just wanted to check exactly which roads it went to. That there were 400 letters posted.
Correct. That's correct. We had 3 colleagues on site that directed all the properties on the 129 Hamilton Road and the adjacent areas. I wouldn't have the names.
Which adjacent areas?
Well, sorry, my colleagues aren't here, but I do know that 400 properties were targeted and letters were posted through their letterboxes.
I am well within the 400 mark, and I imagine the other lady is as well.
Yeah.
If 400 letters were delivered to within the vicinity of this property, I would have got one, and I didn't. And
Precisely.
there's no one who I know knew about it either. So I question that.
Okay, then to respond, please, to what you just told us. Thank you. I guess it will just be a case of he said, she said, because we can't prove where the letters were sent because you didn't even give us that information. Secondly, when I was told about this presentation and the one previously, during the time that the application was first put in, I sent an email to, I believe, the lady who just spoke about when the first presentation was going to be put on the local website. I got no response. I asked about information after the second letter was sent about it would be put on within a month of the first presentation. I again got no response. So that's me actually directly emailing, I believe, the lady who just spoke, and I got no response about that.
Okay, we'll come on to that in a moment. If I could just answer the question about people having residents having their say before the property was purchased. As I said, there wasn't the opportunity to do that before purchase, but that is the purpose of the planning application process, in that the scheme will not go ahead unless we get agreement through the planning application, and so that's why everyone's had that opportunity to comment on the application, and then a committee will make a decision and will take into account all of the comments that have been received. So planning themselves do the formal process and send letters to the properties, and they have a legal duty to do that, so they will have posted it to all the ones that they have to. We wanted to engage with a broader cross-section and a broader number of residents before submitting planning, which is why we wrote to 400 residents. So we have made a genuine attempt to engage with as many of the local residents as we can. I can't at this moment answer questions about individual houses and why. Clearly there are people on the call who didn't receive a letter, but that wasn't for lack of trying, and we did post letters to 400 properties. I don't know, Samira, if there's anything else you can add on responding to queries.
First of all, I'd like to apologize if you felt like you weren't addressed. When residents had emailed requests to join, they were emailed in and invited to attend. On the letters, when we posted, we did say that the presentation would be available on the council website. I think we initially said it would be 2 weeks later after the presentation went live, but obviously, trying to upload, there was problematic issues uploading the presentation, but they did become available, and this one will become available again, hopefully within 10 days after this session.
Right, I appreciate that answer, Samara, but as I said, I do correctly remember that it was promised 2 weeks after, and then at the end of the month. I actually emailed several times after that, asking specifically, when is it on the website? Where can I find it? Because I couldn't find it. So it was just a case of residents or people who have a vested interest going onto the Barnet website every day or whatever and just searching for this thing. I'll go on to my next question, please.
Yes, please.
Your assessments for the children. First, I actually do want to say also, I'm not necessarily against this type of community endeavor. It's just most of my concerns are to do with the location and how it will affect the location. You said an assessment will be made of children who will be suitable for this residential stay, but as well as looking at children's behaviors or people's behaviors in general, people can also lie when asking or assessing people. So there's really no way, I mean, you can look at a person's history, but there's no way really to say what their intentions will be once they are within the property.
Matthew, okay.
So I pick that up then. So it's true that risk assessments are at best an assessment, and they're not a sort of predictor of future certainties. So no, we can never be completely certain of people's intentions, and it would be misleading of me to to say otherwise. However, these assessments are based on far more than a one-off conversation with the child and trying to find out a little bit about them. They're based on all the partner records of knowledge of that child over time. So, so contact with the education department within the local authority, health checks, checks on all their background in terms of sort of contact with the police, any social care history, any relevant youth offending history. Checks are also undertaken actually not just in the child's home borough, but in each of the 5 neighbouring boroughs and with each of those teams as well, because we've given some thought to, you know, both the fact that people move, but also that it's not just about whether it's a good idea to put one child in the property, but we need to think about the mix of children in that property and how you know, and ensure that that is a good mix as well. So they're really extensive, and they're not based on a solitary conversation, those checks, but on the best possible knowledge and history that is available about around that child. But yes, ultimately, you're right. It is a risk assessment. It's as robust as we believe we can possibly make it, but it's not a certainty in terms of the future.
Okay, thank you for your answer. My further questions are relating to the effect on parking. We do know that Hamilton Road and my street, which is the next street, is a street adjacent to Hamilton Road, are all parking permit controlled. With the 2 members of staff who will be in the property, as well as the children themselves, because I'm assuming children are up to 18, or maybe up to 18, they could drive. And then also, even if you mentioned about having permission to have family or friends over, that is going to actually negatively affect already small parking area, particularly too with the ULEZ charge that is coming in, or at the end of this month, I believe it is. People already park in the adjacent streets to commute to work. They'll also park their cars because of the ULEZ to get public transport to go to work. People come to the shops, the local shops there, and park there to come to work. There's notoriously always traffic in that area to begin with. So I pay for my permit parking, and I'm included on that road. I'm included on Hamilton Road for my permit parking, and this will affect that.
Matt, are you able to respond to that in terms of what additional parking there is likely to be as a result of this project? I know that highways are consulted formally as part of the planning application and will have issued their response. So
I'm going to need to apologise because I don't have this to hand, but I know that a conversation has been had around parking. Well, what I can say is that there was there's one allocated space that comes with the property, so will be off road and will be made use of. Now we have had a discussion with the police advisor who talks to us about, is it secure properties? Ben, I can't remember.
Secure by design.
Secure by design, and he has flagged parking for us. Now, to the best of my recollection, he was seeking a commitment that anyone else visiting the property did not park in the immediate vicinity of the property, and I think he suggested an alternative location at a short distance away where parking would not be problematic. But I can't recall the detail of that, so I think what we're going to have to do, Frida, is check that answer and come back to you through Samaya.
Can I just check, Matthew, you're on the call. I don't know whether you know the answer to that. You may not, and we will come back to it. But
no, unfortunately, I don't. What I would say is that if there is any parking that will be taking place, it is likely to be short-term parking opposed to long-term parking in those areas. So not long stays. It is more likely for staff who will be coming and going. And secondly, the children who will be there, it will be highly unlikely that they will have any vehicles to be parking on the streets as well.
Thank you. Not unlikely, but possible, and also friends and family who visit, also possibly. And thank you for your comments about, that they will be encouraged to park a little further or walkways away from the property, but that can't be assured. It's the same with even with the shops, it's supposed to be short term, but it's all, ask anyone who's on Hamilton Road or adjacent to Hamilton Road. It's always chock-a-block, always. I'll go on to my next question. Thank you.
Sorry, Frida, can I just interrupt you there and check? I want to make sure everyone gets their opportunity to ask any questions. I will come back to you, but I just want to check, Mia, you've got your hand up. Is that a legacy hand, or are you still? Would you like to ask?
I can't cancel. I think. Do I? Can I? Or do I put it down? 1 second.
Great. Okay.
Can I put it down? No,
yeah. You just click on it again. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. So Frida will come back to you then if you'd like to ask.
Thank you. Thank you. I apologize if I am taking a lot of questions. The back garden for the children that are going to be there, you already said it's going to be restricted at certain times. When it's not restricted, I don't believe it is enough space, because I know the placement and the setting of that property to include enough space, a leisure space for the children or for people who will be in the property. So, and also if it is restricted, it'll be more than likely people will be hanging around outside or adjacent to the property or near the property. And this will cause an intimidation factor, especially for elderly or vulnerable people who live in the area, or as someone mentioned, their children going to the local shop. So how is that supposed to be addressed?
Should I pick that up, Ben?
If that's okay, thank you.
Yeah, so there is a crossover in terms of timings. So children are, as we're proposing it, allowed into the garden up until 10 o'clock at night. They're also, every child in the property will be subject to an electronic curfew that prevents them from being outside of the property in the evening and overnight. I'm not sure exactly what the curfew times will be, but they're likely to be in the region of 8 to 9 p.m. to 8 to 9 a.m. That would be typical. So children will not be able to be outside at the front of the property at that point in time, nor will they be able to be outside at the rear of the property after 10 o'clock. So they will be inside at that point in time. The other thing that I'd emphasise really is going back to the two timetables, the level of activity that we'll expect and offer to these kids to take part in, much of which will be away potentially from the immediate vicinity. So I can't tell you exactly what that will be at this moment in time. It will depend on the child's interests, which of the partners offers us access to their facilities, but typically I'd say it would be sports projects, visiting a leisure centre or a gym, or some sort of activity like that. But occupation of the kids is absolutely critical for a number of reasons, which is why we're putting in place not just an accommodation provider who will do that with high levels of staffing, but bringing that whole wider system into play for supporting the child as well. So their youth offending workers, their social workers, and there's some voluntary sector commissions as well. So some mentors who are being lined up to support the children as well. So I'd say that is a risk really well flagged of unoccupied children who have nowhere to spend time, but it's one that I believe our planning will get ahead of.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned also about community representation. Sorry, yes, thank you. And it's also a case of, you mentioned also just now about mentors and other people who will be involved with the scheme to keep the children productive and occupied. But then this also goes to my initial concern about parking and space in the area, because more staff will mean more parking challenges.
Yeah, and I think
but you've answered that.
Yeah,
I mean, that's just the point. So
the parking as best we can for now. Although I will recheck that, because I do believe that there's something else, is another solution's been raised around that. But I would just say again, in terms of those activities, yeah, that they won't be on site or in the immediate vicinity. So so a significant number of them will involve collecting children and taking them to another site, potentially at some distance, or the child going to the train station and hopping on a train to go to college, for example. So it's not necessarily about everyone wanting to come into this property and offer support within it. A significant amount of that will be at some remove as well.
Right. Okay.
Can I bring in James? Sorry, James has got his hand, so I will come back to you, Frida.
Do the police support the scheme?
Do the police support the scheme?
Yes. Do the police support the scheme?
So the police were involved in putting together the risk management plan that was referred to earlier, and provided information for the risk assessment. So they've been involved in developing the plan for managing the project.
But do they support the scheme?
So they have they're not able to provide comment on whether they support it or otherwise, because their code of practice dictates that they shouldn't make any political comments, and they view this as, if they were to offer support directly to the scheme, it would be seen as a political comment. And so they say their code of ethics means they can't say that they are in support of the scheme, but they have been involved in the risk assessment and in the risk management plan. Were there any other? Did you have any other questions, James? Okay, I'll come back to Frida then. Did you have another question?
Yeah, just one more question. Thank you for, I know there were a lot, but thank you for giving me the time. And thank you for everyone also in the team meeting. My final question was, it's connected also with the application or the purchase of the property, because first of all, I've seen that the property's already had some refurbishment or was having refurbishment done over the summer. So I first wanted to know what that was about. And then secondly, I don't know how this property could have been purchased for your potential scheme if Barnet actually are the promise for the political involved, like for the next 4 years, it's to encourage more residential housing availability within the borough. I just see it as a clash, because we need residential property, and I know these children need somewhere, but we need residential, not a scheme or a HM or anything like that in the area. It's a clash with the promises that we've had promised by our council.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of the work that was going on over the summer, that was some pretty basic work that would have been required whatever happened to the property. So Barnet Homes purchased the property, and then they've contracted some initial work just to bring it up to standard, and that work would be required whatever the outcome of the planning application is, because it will be used, it'll be used for something after this, and so they wanted to progress that work while this planning application was in process. And there's other work that would need to be done specific to this use, but that would only be done once a decision is made on planning. And in terms of the other bit of the question, there's an enormous amount of residential housing being built across Barnet. I can't remember the exact figures on it, but it's tens of thousands of new homes are being built. I think in Barnet alone, it's something like the same size as the whole of Canterbury is being built over a period of 10 years. So there are huge numbers of new residential houses being built, and so there's also within planning policy, there's a desire to build properties that meet the needs of a whole range of different people. And so there's a need for properties like this as well. But I think given the scale of residential builds that is going on across the borough, this is only one property out of that huge number.
Thank you.
Okay, I can't see any more hands raised, and we're now pretty much at the end of the time that we'd allocated. So I'd just like to thank you hugely for your engagement in this session, for asking such helpful questions and providing so many comments. And I'll just draw your attention to, I think there've been further documents have been published today on the council planning website, and there will be letters coming round to residents from planning about that. But yeah, I'll just finish by thanking you again for your participation today, and I will bring the session to an end.
Thank you.
Thank you.